Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the first part in a new series that I am happy to begin today. This is Sunday morning, and I'm actually sharing my breakfast with you all. May not be breakfast every Sunday, but I'll be sharing something with you, and we'll be going over the A to Z of my favorite Bible right here, from the cover, front cover to the back cover, a letter, an episode, going through each genus within that letter. So before I do that, I know that my subscribers and people that have watched my videos know that I bring up my Bibles and show different books pretty much every video, if not every video. And there are an assortment of books, some that I refer to as the Bible, and others that are just books. So there is a history behind that, and in order to do that, I have to turn the camera down on the table and kind of explain to you, and I'll do that while I'm having breakfast, and then I will start with the letter A. Stay tuned. Okay, and we are back. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll set Botanicas away for a second and explain sort of how I rely so much on these books. Well, at risk of giving away my age, well, I'm not. I don't care. I'm 56. I just turned 56 in May. So, and I've been growing orchids for a while. Even Ed, who is my buddy, I wish there was a way to meet him. Ed's Orchids, who, I mean, if he doesn't know a genus, if he finds one and grows it, he will bloom it confidently. So he has called me the old guy, meaning like the old wise guy. Like I can't learn anything else that I don't already know, and I don't think that's necessarily true, because I can read all the books in the world, and I have. That didn't make me have any more success than I have now with the internet. I use these books more than the internet, in fact, because the internet, first of all, it takes a while. It's not instant, it's not fast, and right here I can just walk and flip pages. And I've read them so many times, I know well, I don't know which book has which species, but my Bibles generally have the majority of them, as this one does, and a few. Some of these are not the Bibles, but in telling the story of how I got to this stage in my Bibles, because I'm talking about my orchid hobby began pre-internet. So like I tell people, I was living in Chicago. Then I know there was a iOS. I know I had found some of those the AOS pamphlets. They were like bulletins. I don't think they do those anymore, but I used to find those, and I would scour used bookstores looking for information on orchids. Once I got to the third stage of orchid addiction, where you want to have one in bloom at all time, I literally was stopping and buying orchids in cleaners. Would go to different cleaners around Chicago, and some of them, not all of them, would have next to the counter would have a big rack of orchids, mostly just big foo-foo, no tag. All of it was no ID, an occasional den, file, but that was my introduction, and I relied on these books to tell me, because I wasn't buying it from an orchid place. They didn't know. They were just, they couldn't even speak English. So I started buying books because I like research. So you have to do. You have to research. If you buy an orchid and you don't know what it is, if you don't pull out your phone or ask somebody, you just buy it because it smells, it's going to be dead. Unless you research it before you mess with it. But in order for me to even be curious about being successful with growing orchids, you have to know where they come from. You have to get some sort of sense of what the culture is. And you have to have the literature and the data. And so that's why I'm saying I would go to use the bookstores. So there was a book I know that was one of the first books that I got, and it was Taylor's Guide. This is the perennial guide. I don't know. It was an orchid guide, and I swear I read it a million times. All of these, I would sit them by the toilet and would just read and read and read and read and read and read and read, trying to just learn, seeing the differences in the species and genuses, because this book only has, well, this says 417, but I really was looking for more so the pictures, because my view of orchids was this big, and these books widened it to all of the genuses and species that I would never, and even hybrids. But this was one of the first ones, and then there was some of these in just various orders. But I remember getting, even black and white guides, and I would read these. Not necessarily, I would read it for the culture, because generally the culture was the same. So I really just scanned the culture. That's how generic it was. I would skip back to where they got into the actual species, and you can see some of the pages I highlighted, Cattleyas, and then I moved to Seattle, and I found this book, and I believe that this book really stuck with me, because I know I had already had a Marfitch, one of those, not a Bellaria, but you know what I mean. It's a generic, like a Brassia type, and it's called Marfitch something. And there may be a couple of them, and I know I liked that. And when I saw this, I became even more obsessed, because here was a guy who did photography, because this is more or less like his notes. And this is pretty much how I like to pattern my Orchids a Day series, just because it's personal. It's not about, a general blanket cultural guide. It's not. It's I live in zone 5. This year is not typical for it to be August and me sitting out here. There's no bugs, no humidity. It's a breeze. This is unheard of. I'm usually inside in the air conditioner, or rushing out here really quickly before I sweat, because 90% humidity, and it's usually 90 all the month of August and half of September, really. And no rain, dry. So that's the really the worst situation for orchids, because they get a lot of wet. Well, no, they don't get a lot of wet. They just get heat. So you have to water them, and you really have to time when you water them, because it's in extreme heat. Because of the humidity factor, you can't just water them anytime, because since it's humid, they're not going to evaporate and dry. They're going to stay wet for longer periods. So it's really the worst zone when it's normal, because in the winter it's the exact opposite. It's frigid, low humidity, none, and you have to make your environment more like tropical. So that's where I'm coming from when I go through this Botanica and talk about the plants that I have, the plants that I've killed. It is from the perspective and the location, and from the perspective, I should say, I'll just leave it at that, of my grow area, zone 5, and how I grow, which is they stay out in the summer months. And you can see, well, I have the cage. There are more out of the cage, in my opinion, but in the winter they all go in the greenhouse. none in the house. All in the greenhouse. That's my rule. So I wanted to say that first because there's a reason why I'm so attached to books. That marfitch, and I had one of those marfitch plants. I think I killed it, but because it stayed alive so long, I had such a connection with this book, and it just made me hungry for more. And I kept buying and buying and buying, and I remember getting this exotic orchids, which really turned me on because in all of these books, as I built my collection, obviously when I started, I didn't have any but a few, and maybe that one wasn't even in the book. But I idealized myself as I looked at these books a million times, that someday when I look through these books, I'll be able to go, I have that, I have that, I have that, I have that, I have that. So think about that when I talk about, or when I go through this Botanica, or Botanica, I keep saying Botanica, but it's Botanica. And so this right here, really, when I talk about how I'm so into history with orchids, that's part of the research, is looking at the history, because somebody else did the field research and brought it back and figured out what their requirements were. And this book, along with the art, it gives that history of where it came from, the year, even like stories about how difficult the plant was and to grow and get established, and just the hybridization, just treachery that was involved, which again adds to the whole mystique and just the whole idea of how orchids are so rare, unique, hard, difficult, fleeting. So the whole idea behind any of these videos, I would say, with YouTube, me, whoever, or an orchid girl, we're all here to help to show what we're doing, and so that whoever watches can maybe learn something, a tip, or how we repot or mount something that will help better their success with orchids. Who wants to kill an orchid because they're fleeting, really? So I'm just going to take another bite of my sandwich, and then I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to get started when I clean my throat, so that I'm not unclear, because I don't have a mic. I'm sorry, but I think you can hear me okay. I don't hear the birds. So I'll be right back in a second. Thanks for sticking around.